Okay, today we're gathering with Jared Alexander, an entertainment journalist who has long covered the Real Housewives, always a familiar, friendly face at Bravo events. And he's on here to unpack the Real Housewives of New Jersey season 14 premiere. Jared, I'm so glad we're finally doing this. How are you?
I'm good, Gibson. I'm so glad we're finally doing this. Like you said, we're like familiar faces in the trenches covering all these crazy Bravo ladies.
We have been in the trenches a lot together.
We've seen some things for
We've seen
sure.
some things. I mean, this past BravoCon, we would always meet up in the lobby of Harrah's at the Starbucks with a 20-minute line and then just get going
Run
with
on
our
over to
day.
Caesars. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah. Okay, so last night was the premiere and you went to a watch party or a premiere party at Margaret's house. How was it? Who was there? Give me just the quick lowdown before we jump into the episode.
yeah, it was awesome. It was like exactly what you'd expect from a Margaret Joseph's party. I mean, it was like super fabulous, and it was very much that side of the cast. I would say. I think the Fudas are in Italy right now, but it was, of course, Margaret, Lexi, of course, and then it was Melissa, Joe, Jen Fessler, and her husband, and then Dolores and Polly were there too, of course, who's like famously right smack in the middle of that cast. And it was just good vibes all around. I mean, there was like great food, and then we watched it, and then I had to get my butt back to back to the city.
When you're watching an episode, I mean, I feel like I've been to watch parties and things, but is there commentary when you are watching that, or is it just kind of like,
It's, it's usually on in the background. I feel like when the episode started, like the first 7 minutes, it felt like everyone was kind of watching, and then people have to go to the bar, and then there are side conversations, and then you eat, and like you said, you've been to those screenings. It's also just hard to hear no matter where you are. Like I remember that big Potomac party they did in DC that time. It was like it was cool, but it's like again, it's just like hard. Like you always are so excited to watch it when it's out
yeah,
because you can't like watch it from the comfort of your home.
exactly. Okay, so the premiere. What did you think of the episode itself? I thought it was a fine premiere, but what did you think of it?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. I think it for sure was a fine premiere. I think all of us going into this season, of course, after the way last season ended, we're just like, how is this going to work? And I think that they answered that question successfully. I feel like it does work. And while, of course, like Melissa and Teresa, they kind of set the tone, being like, we're not going to talk about each other. They still at least will be at these same events with each other. And that's honestly fine. I feel like what we aren't talking about is that this cast is pretty strong all around
Hmm.
to really carry a show. This isn't like, I know obviously Teresa and Melissa, like this has been, maybe it's like the longest running feud on Bravo at this point, like ever. But I think that we have really heavy hitters in this cast that can do just fine on their own and can do just fine on a Housewives show. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I do think it was helpful to see exactly how we will kind of address the Melissa Teresa thing. Like, we see Melissa being asked by a producer something about Teresa, and she's like, I just don't want to answer any Teresa questions. Obviously, they kind of do her dirty, but like they cut to the next scene and it's her and Joe talking about sending off Antonia to college, and we see Melissa bring up the fact that Joe helped move in one of Teresa's daughters like a couple years ago. And so like that makes her, obviously the fans on the Teresa side get like all riled up because it's like, oh, she's already breaking her vow to not talk about Teresa. Well, it's like obviously they're not going to talk about each other as much as they can, but they're still on the same show and on the same cast and in the same family technically. So like there are going to be moments where their names come up, but I think overall they're being pretty respectful on either side. And when they go to a group event, they're just kind of just going to ignore each other. And I think it's going to be awkward at first, and I bet you it's going to get less awkward as it goes on, depending on how many group events they actually have with everybody there.
1000%. I agree. And I feel like even those scenes too, a lot of times those are just like the mechanics of making a show like this. Like you're always like, who's going to be there? And then you talk about it, which is very different than, last season. I feel like the crux of the season was leading up to this wedding and the tension and the Louis of it all. And you could say the same thing that, Teresa was talking about them at the dinner with Dolores and Polly. So I feel like it's one thing to kind of talk about it within the context of like, again, like making a show like this where like you kind of are you're putting the pieces together for the audience to follow
Exactly.
along versus like actually talking about it
Like
all the time.
talking shit. Yeah, talking shit
Right.
basically. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And okay, so the episode starts with this clip that we had seen on social media last week, but it's this like epic 80 seconds. That's like just pure cinema. It's Dolores, in like sepia tones at the table, this huge table at Rail Steakhouse, an icon of Real Housewives of New Jersey, sitting there like a mob wife, just like kind of leaning back in her chair. And then we cut to some screaming in the background, glasses being swept up from the floor. We see, I think there's like a Birkin in the corner with some liquid spilled on it. We hear like, how did it ever come to this? Like, it's the drama it's like the family kind of divide and drama that I just want from Jersey. And I haven't stopped thinking about that clip in particular, honestly.
It gives it is so good. I feel like we all haven't stopped thinking about it, and I'm glad they released it before. As frustrating as it can be, that like sometimes you'll see half the episode before it's
I
out.
know.
It was so fun, and I feel like that really quelled. Like I saw so many people online who maybe weren't the most excited about the season who were like, "Wait, I think I'm tapped in again." Like who were just
Yes.
so excited, and it was really fun. I wonder what you think too. It was fun to see Dolores really like center as the glue of this group. Like we've always known that, and it can be. And I love Dolores. Like she's probably one of my favorite housewives. I just
Yeah,
think
she's amazing.
there's an authenticity to her. But I have been frustrated with her, of course, over the years because sometimes it really does feel like she's very Karen Huger. She kind of is the fence. But it was fun to see them really lean into that in terms of like her being a power player,
Right.
like even just like her having like the first confessional of the episode. And I feel like there really is something to that, and it was so fun to see her because she's been on now. I think I was doing the math. It's either like her seventh or eighth season. It's kind of been
Yeah.
a long
It's
time. So
wild. Yeah, she feels like one of those sort of like de facto OGs because the show has been on for so long that she's just been a constant. And like, yeah, I think that she gets criticism, but I think that ultimately, she just is her authentic self, and she is somebody who wants to bring people together, at least be able to be in with everybody. And I don't think that's some sort of calculated thing or some inauthentic thing. I think that's just who Dolores is. And like, I mean, she was at the watch party that you went to, but she's also really close to Teresa, and everyone's kind of like game for Dolores to be that way. It's kind of like, it's no longer like a point of contention that Dolores gets to be on both sides. It's just how she is. I think that everyone's accepted that, which I think is important. But I totally agree. It's sort of like, her, what was kind of billed as sort of her weakness is sort of her kind of like Achilles heel is now sort of her biggest strength, I think. And you know yeah. Okay, so the episode starts off, and I thought it was actually really interesting that after that clip we cut to the Fudas, and they're sort of with their family and with their extended family. So we're kind of, which is full of characters and people who are kind of give us some commentary and kind of ask the questions about the mess. And obviously the Fudas are clocked in and showing up to work this season in a really big way. And I thought it was kind of telling that we're starting the season with their family.
I think so too. I mean, I feel like he got a really big chunk of the episode, more than like Jen Aiden did, And
Yeah.
I feel like there's something to be said. Again, I feel like this is a show that historically has been so hard to cast because it's so centered around families and interconnected people. And I feel like from what we've seen so far, Rachel and Danielle really worked last year, and I'm excited to see them enter their sophomore season. And I feel like for Rachel, it's just exciting. She's got a great family, and she's pretty young. I mean, she's 34, so especially compared to this cast, I feel like it's just a completely different type of energy. And it was interesting to see her kind of set the stage from what we eventually find out by the end of the episode. It's going to be a Fudas versus Louis Teresa.
Totally, totally. And it's like, I do think that in many ways, like they could be the quote unquote future of the franchise if indeed like this season is sort of the band-aid for their solution for their problems versus like an actual long-term fix. But I also think that the fact that Rachel and her husband are basically sworn enemies of Teresa and Louis at this point, like they're never going to be accepted fully by like basically half of the viewership because out of loyalty to Teresa. So I, we're setting the stage obviously for the rest of the season, but I'm really curious how it's going to kind of net out because she is really strong. She has so much promise and so much of a runway, but I don't know. It's just interesting. It's she's coming for the giant of the
Oh,
show.
it's so hard because I feel like on this show though, like you kind of have to. That is how you prove your worth. It's kind of
Right.
going up against
Totally.
Teresa. So like, and that is where you see what you're made of. But on the flip side, you're right. You have a whole side of the fandom that has kind of pushed you off. But then you have a lot of housewives who, again, Margaret was super up and down. She was super close to Teresa at the beginning, and then down, and then up,
Right.
and then down. But still, I think people you could last a really long time. It just all depends on kind of how you play it. And I feel like, and I'm sure we're gonna get there, but I feel like Rachel's approach is really interesting in terms of the way Teresa pushes people's buttons, and she was upset, but not freaking out by any means the whole episode.
Rachel wasn't freaking out, or Teresa wasn't?
Rachel wasn't.
Oh yeah, because Teresa was, but
Right. Yeah. Teresa was. And it was cool to see someone not
get
give back
flustered.
the exact same energy, you know?
Oh yeah, like at the party at the end of the episode, Rachel just sort of sitting there at that bar stool, like as Teresa and Jennifer both come at her, and she's like pretty unflustered by it, which is impressive.
Yeah. Very
Completely.
yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. So let's follow the Fuda Teresa Louis thing since we're on it. So basically, last season at the reunion, it comes out that Louis had hired a private investigator to investigate John Fuda and like their past and contacted his ex and all these things. And we see a scene with Teresa and Louis where basically Louis is like, I contacted John Fuda to meet up one-on-one to kind of hash things out. And Fuda comes back and says, I'll see you at Jen Fessler's surprise party. And he sort of wants to have that moment there. Louis kind of conveniently has this like cryptic business meeting in Florida, so he has to miss the party. And that's kind of all we get from that. And so he doesn't show up. So that kind of leaves Teresa to bring Jen as sort of her backup, and she kind of comes in hot. She comes for Rachel, she comes for John Fuda. John Fuda comes for Paulie. Like it's this kind of everyone's heated, but I think that it's because Louis didn't show up to kind of have that moment just with Fuda, honestly. What did you think of sort of the lead up to that and Louis bowing out? And I don't know. It's
It's sticky. I feel like the bigger, like the thing that they aren't really saying is that for Louis and John to talk about it separately could mean not on camera. And frankly,
Right.
I imagine that the Fudas want to hold him accountable on camera because of all the things he said about them and did. You know what I mean? It's like
that part. Yeah.
So it's like, I'll see you at the party because like then we'll talk about it if you really are going to be, because it seems like, again, this is what they say. It seems like Louis' behavior is very different on camera versus off in the way he tries to like appear. So I feel like that is kind of what was being unsaid. And it's tough. I mean, you saw Gibson like at both BravoCons at this point, but especially this one. Like when you are around these women, and I do think that what stands out with this cast is that they are really authentic. These are real friendships. This is real life, and like the stakes are really high, and a lot of them were very hurt by what was alleged and the investigations and stuff like that. So it does feel like all the tension did make sense. And I'm sure we'll get into it though. I think it's going to be an interesting watch, which it really wasn't on my radar too much, but it seems like there's going to be like a meta layer to watching this season because of like some of the fan stuff that's been going on online in terms of how storylines develop on the show. And I found watching the premiere on Sunday night really interesting considering the news week we had, because you kind of saw how certain things are kind of laid out beat by beat.
Yeah. So what you're referring to is that over the past couple of weeks, it's come out that Jennifer Aydin and Teresa, I think to a lesser extent, but Teresa is sort of involved in this as well. They would basically, some fan accounts that have historically been in their corner and been sort of ride or die for them, turned on them. I don't really know exactly why they turned on them. Do you know why?
I don't. Okay. Gibson, the way I literally was avoiding this until it became big enough that like people were reporting on it.
I was avoiding it, but so I'm not really sure to people listening sort of why the flip happened. But basically, these accounts who have been in the corner of Jen and Teresa for a long time came out with all these receipts that basically showed that they were feeding them information to post on their fan accounts so that they would be out there and Teresa and Jennifer could like refer to them on the show essentially. So using last night's premiere as a case study in that, there's a scene where Teresa and Jennifer are riding in the car to Jen Fessler's surprise party. They're talking about, oh, have you seen what's out there on social media about John Fuda? And they bring up this like claim that John Fuda likes to use a double-sided dildo or something. And like, it's just like so outrageous, but that's quote unquote out there on social media. So then Teresa can come into the party and be like, you know what they're saying on social media about you, John Fuda, is you like to use a dildo and you used to be a drug dealer and all these things. And like, that's how that kind of stuff gets put out there. Correct? Did I summarize that?
No, that
Okay.
was exactly it. And
Okay.
again, it created this, I feel like we have these moments in Housewives where things happen post filming, and then when you watch again, there's new context. Like, of course, Beverly Hills America, you like think about
Yeah.
that, or you think about with Kyle Mauricio this past season. Again, I think it's going to give us really interesting context because, and again, it's all alleged. This is like
Yeah, of
there are
course.
quite a few accounts who are talking about this, but who knows
There's
where the actual
screenshots.
truth lies. But exactly, there are screenshots and just the way it all goes down and the way that they use social media. And I think too, in this new era we're in, if we're going to talk about a reality Von T situation
Yep.
and ethically in lines, where does this fall? Do you know what I mean? Like it kind
Yeah.
of becomes murky waters in terms of how
Yeah,
these
and
women use social media.
I think that like obviously Jennifer and Teresa, the spotlight is on them in regards to this because it's a lot of it's come out in recent weeks about them in particular. But it should be said that I'm pretty sure almost every housewife has a fan account or a journalist or somebody who they are always sort of in contact with giving information to. Like it's sort of how the game works, and I think it's just being uncovered. It's being the lid's been blown off of it. And so one, I'm curious how it affects how they use social media and the fan accounts and sort of that whole ecosystem going forward. Now they know that they can be sort of found out in this way. But I think you're right to sort of connect it to reality Von Teese, because it's like Monica's whole sort of pushback on the criticism to her was, no, but you guys all engaged with the account. You would send me messages, you would react to things, and that's kind of happening behind the scenes all the time, I think. But I think that when you do something to clearly they did something to piss the accounts off, so they turned on them, and it's a dangerous game to play. It is.
It's a little bit of like play stupid games, win stupid prizes, a little bit, just because
Yeah.
you can't, at least journalistically, right? Like
Yeah.
I would hope for the most part, it's reporting. So it's different. And of course, you can have a feature and you can do an interview where you can speak your piece, but there are just like certain ethics that go along there. And with fan accounts, there aren't, And
Mm-mm.
but it's really insatiable. I mean, some fan accounts literally break news, especially now. And it's not like before when like you would go to like the Bravo blogs to hear what they had to say, or each city had their own, whether it was, famously Radar Online or Page Six or something. And
Yeah.
now we're kind of in this new terrain where like again, there's like this ecosystem of fan accounts that really do engage. And I think I'm interested to see how we move into a new era. And I suspect that a lot of the women are going to be a lot more cautious with the accounts,
I think
maybe
so too.
from above. Like, I feel like there's going to be a lot more
Oh,
oversight over that.
I'm sure that Bravo has their eye on this for sure, especially as like their top stars are getting in the weeds with it. And like, but I think that for people listening, it's sort of like when you see fan accounts break news and things like, which I think is great for them to get access to certain things and kind of it helps put them on the map. And both you and I probably have great relationships with a lot of accounts, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
now when you see it, something like that breaking news or kind of leaking something like that's probably coming from, if not a housewife, then somebody on production or something who's like sort of in the weeds with it and wants it to get out there. Um,
Yeah.
so back to the party. So John Fuda, the criticism that I saw in terms of, social media, but also I bet one of the reasons why Louis took himself out of the equation for that party was one, not doing it on camera, and two, also not giving John Fuda the moment that I think a lot of people thought he was looking for, which like I would agree with. Like I think that he wanted to have his on-camera moment, obviously to hold Louis accountable, but also to further his own sort of image making on the show. Um, he still had a moment with Teresa. He had a moment with Paulie, who he accused of basically trying to play the fence, but ultimately being on Louis' side of things.
Yeah.
What did you think of Fuda's sort of performance at John Fuda's performance at Jen Fessler's surprise party? Do you think that he was looking for the moment? Do you think he got his moment? What do you think?
It's a lot. And well, here's the thing. I think that two things can be true. I think he absolutely, it felt like he was kind of looking for a moment, but also that's just the nature of how these shows go. And I feel like every time Jersey comes up, there's always like a certain section of online who's like, is this the real house husbands of New Jersey? And it's like, just the husbands have been baked into the DNA of this show
Mm-hmm.
since the beginning. Like they've had
Totally.
confessionals from the beginning. So it's just kind of how the show works. It's very much about family. So you are going to see the husbands get into it. And as annoying as it can be, and as annoying as people, this is going to be a little shady, as annoying as people feel about it, the ratings don't reflect that. It's still one of the
Right.
highest rated
Totally.
like housewife shows. It's right under Beverly Hills. So like, it's a formula that really works for now for them. Is it kind of annoying sometimes to like when you're like, I just want to get to the women. Why am I seeing these men scrap over this stupid stuff? But I think considering how you can look at it both ways. I mean, it seems like Louis and Teresa kind of brought a lot of the husbands into it
Yeah.
based on the alleged actions from the reunion. So of course it's where we're going to pick up, you know. But of course, when you see any husband kind of rev up and like try and have a moment, it just feels a little off because we're watching Real Housewives, you know. And I feel like I don't know if maybe just because like Joe's connection to Teresa, literally by blood, just of course feels a bit more authentic. It is a little like, okay,
Right.
we're gonna
Right.
have a moment.
Yeah, totally. And one, they all get paid a lot of money to be on the show, the husbands as well. So that's one thing to know. And two, so it's like literally their job. And two, I think the pushback that I would have, which I was texting a mutual friend of ours about this episode, and they brought up a good point, is that like the same people criticizing John Fuda for trying to have a moment and being sort of like kind of in the weeds with the drama are also kind of actively defending Louis and his place on the show. And he's just as much in the drama as anybody else. So you gotta, the different standards I think are always going to be apparent on Jersey, but you got to just keep that in mind and like kind of look at it from the other angle and be like, okay, if it's okay for Louis to get into it, then it should be okay for John Fuda to get into it, basically. So let's just like accept that that is part of the DNA of the show. Um, so the other thing that I wanted to ask you about with Louis and Teresa is that they had this dinner with Polly and Dolores on the episode, and Teresa brings up that Frank told her and Louis that the other side of the group met up before the reunion, before New York, to kind of lay the groundwork for their plan to take down Teresa and Louis at that reunion. And again, I think for me, for like people like you and I who are so sort of like in the weeds with this, that's not a revelation to us in terms of like, of course, people are like meeting up and sort of hatching plans before a reunion because like so much rides on those reunions, like getting a new contract, like kind of getting the last word in, kind of responding to things that happen in the season. They're really important, obviously. So to kind of be aligned before that is not a surprise to me. Um, but what did you think of her bringing that up? And I also, again, I saw somebody bring it up. It's sort of like, how is that different from Teresa and Jennifer meeting up with Margaret's ex-best friend Laura before last season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I saw your tweet that was basically what you just said, and it was immediate retweet because that is true. And Dolores kind of says that too, like a meeting of the minds before the reunion. Like it's just you go into prep, and I feel like I don't want to be wrong. It was either your podcast or another one where Leva was talking about like when it's like around reunion time, like you just see like the casts just like gearing, like they're just like always out and like having dinner because like
Right.
you just need to like get your story straight. Like you just need
Yeah.
to like wrap your brain around what just happened and you're about to like binge 12 episodes of like we all know those little things, right, that they all talk about.
And they haven't all been together for months because there's been a lot of time between filming and the reunion as well. So just yeah, getting that in
Correct.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, and frankly the season ended with allegedly, well, he said it, but allegedly this guy hired a private investigator against all of them. So of course they're going to meet
Yeah.
before to like figure out how they're going to approach this. You know, like I feel like that
Yeah.
just makes sense. Just like I'm sure there have been plenty of times where Teresa has met up. You know what I mean? If like they knew, you know, like there's like it would be hard for me to imagine that Jacqueline Larita's last season, Teresa and Melissa weren't on the phone the night before.
Right.
It's hard to imagine that, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that, but I understand her feeling like, listen, for Teresa, like she has let us know she is 10 toes down for this man. She is in love with him and she feels like he has been constantly attacked since he's been on the show. And I feel like from her perspective there's a little bit of like, well, I chose this and he didn't. And I think for the other side and for some other viewers they're like it doesn't seem that way, but
Yeah.
I understand her frustration for
Of
sure.
course.
I genuinely do, but I think like meeting before the reunion is like, come
Yeah.
on.
I think that she's probably feels ganged up on and all those things, but I also think that bringing that up as sort of some big revelation is just sort of a way to deflect from the actual accusations and some facts about Louis that came out at that reunion. You know what I mean? It's sort of trying to overshadow that and kind of misdirect or redirect sort of some of the ire. So in this reunion, I mean, I feel like that's kind of all I want to talk about in terms of like the Fudas and Teresa and Louis. Like I kind of feel like, you know, he I guess, did you see after the episode John Fuda put out like a mock press release? Did you see that?
weird. Like I think that like oh, this is
A
where
little
I just
weird.
sometimes hate. It's like that, or even like a notes Instagram thing or something. It's just like just let it. I feel like the more it gets in the weeds of like communicating off the show, then it's like it's way more confusing just for the viewer. Like just let it play out. Like that's why Watch What
Yes.
Happens live appearances are really crucial because then it's like I'm sure Rachel will be on and maybe John will be in the audience, and then like we can really get it down pat. And I get him wanting to get ahead of something like this. Like I get it, but it's like
But you know what it's
I,
giving? You know what it's giving? It's giving Todd, Alexia's Todd. Remember when he like would do those big long social media videos, like just didn't land. They think that they're being sort of tongue in cheek and really funny, but like it's just not working.
it doesn't land. It becomes really confusing for the audience and for everyone. And then it gives the other side just fodder to be like,
Totally.
it was a yeah. I saw that and I was like, oh my
Yeah.
god,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, and he basically admitted, or like he basically admitted that what Teresa was saying about like him, you know, being a drug dealer in his in a past life essentially was true, and but he's like come a long way and all these things, and so like in some respect, I want to like praise him for owning up to like having sort of a more checkered past, but also it's sort of like just the manner in which he's doing it is just like I do think that he's like he's proving himself to be a little bit of a showman, to use Erica Jane's parlance.
Exactly. Dorit and PK. No, I
Yeah,
think that absolutely it's like that. And again, it reads better if it's like the next episode where like in the Buddha's kitchen and then John is like, look, like I've worked so hard and like my life
totally.
is so different. It was a tiny little thing. And now it's like, like I don't know what it is, but like let's say that's what it is. Like that reads better than it would be like if Evan Goldschneider a couple of years ago released a press release that I was like, I was not hooking up with people at the gym. It's just kind of like
Totally.
just watch it, and then no one really believed it because we just let it play out, or at least I don't know a certain side.
No,
This show is so divided.
no, I know what you're saying, but clearly there's a lot to come in terms of the John Fuda, Rachel Fuda, Teresa Louis situation, and like I'm actually, they're both so riled up that like I actually am kind of here for it. I'm sure it will
Mm-hmm.
cross lines on both sides, but it's I always think Teresa does actually pretty well when somebody gets under her skin in that way. Like she gets activated and she sometimes takes it too far, but I think that I like to see her clocked in because I feel like over the past couple of years there are moments where Teresa has sort of felt a little bit listless on the show, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think to see her really clocked in, I it's actually kind of refreshing to see, and she can hold her own without Louis by her side of the party. Obviously, there's a reason why she's been around for so long, but it's also credit to the Fudas for kind of for getting in there and after just a season. So I'm really curious to see where this all goes this season.
That's the thing too. I think if you treat Housewives again like sports, let's say like Teresa, like any good housewife is sometimes you're just as good as your sparring partner, and like
Yeah.
Teresa is again, she's on the Mount Rushmore. She's one of the best to ever do it. Like I literally fell in love with her from the second I started. She was such an entry
Yeah,
point for
no
me.
denying that.
There's no denying it, and she's such good. Like when she was packing up the candy, it just like I was like, God, Teresa is
Oh,
just
that
like
was iconic, shoving those Starbursts in the bag but missing the bag.
right. She is so iconic. And I think two things to be true though. Also, like a lot of the credit for the longevity is I'm not saying Melissa did that. It's because of Melissa, but I'm saying it's like having someone against you is like that is what House is about. It is a sport. And so like and that has lasted them so long at this point. And it's so exciting to see again, like you said, someone kind of get under her skin. We kind of had like the namaste tree for a
Right.
couple years up until like the last two seasons. So it's kind of cool to see that because I feel like again that is when she's kind of backed into a corner. I mean that famous season 4 Christmas tree dress reunion is like the
Yeah.
Christmas pageant dress. Like that is like such a perfect case of like that's the best Teresa. Like when she's backed into a corner and just like
Yeah. Totally.
lets everyone have it.
100%. So a few other things that we sort of got seeds of in this premiere. There's that scene where Margaret comes over to Jen Fessler's house and they're really good friends, obviously. And they're talking a little bit about Teresa, and Margaret says she's dead to me, essentially. And like, I don't really want to hear about her or you to bring me up to her. But I think that conversation is sort of laying the groundwork for something that we see in the premiere of like Jen Fessler also gets closer to Teresa and maybe to a lesser extent Jen this season. So
Yeah.
obviously that's going to complicate the group dynamic for her. And clearly, I mean, she was at the watch party that you went to. I think that she is still kind of maintained friendships with probably both sides. I don't know where she stands with like the Teresa side, but she's definitely still friends with the Margaret side of things. And I just think that her getting into the mix like this, and again, I tweeted this during the premiere, but it just feels like Jen Fessler is on the rare trajectory of friend of to Real Housewife because she just like everybody likes her. She's great TV,
Hmm.
she's entertaining, and she's kind of stepping it up in her second season in a big way. So, do you see that? Do you see that kind of same track
It
for
feels
her?
like that. It feels like that Sutton edit. I mean, when we were at her house and she had that whole scene of her playing guitar before Margaret even went there, I was like, oh, this is
Yeah,
like
her
she
daughter's in
is.
the scene, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And she's so there's something so likable about her. And I do think that it's going to be interesting to see her maneuver in that way because I do feel like cats only have room for like it's hard to think of like Dolores and Jen being truly Switzerland. I think there's just something about Dolores who is she's just so she has that Patterson side and she's so steadfast.
Right.
And it seems like at least from the trailer, because like Dolores can sit down with Margaret and Margaret can bitch about Jen and Teresa and she will give her opinion without really bashing
Yes.
them. But like we've seen moments where she's like, no, Jen was wrong for that, or to Margaret, she'll be like, Marge, you shouldn't have said that about Jen's husband or whatever. And it seems like at least in the edit, it's gonna be Jen is a bit more of a gossip about it and kind of
Right.
talks differently. And I love a gossip on reality TV. Like that's my favorite. Like that's what we
Obviously.
need. So I think yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how that moves along. And I think and again, obviously, maybe I'm partial because I am a good friend, a fan of Margaret's rather, and I just think that like the hard lines sometimes are really frustrating. But I think we all saw that reunion. I feel like they all kind of have hard lines right now with each other, and it's not going to be able to last forever. But I think for right now, I didn't have an issue with it. Like it felt like it. I like that it wasn't like you can't talk to her at all. It just was like we don't have to talk about her.
Right.
You know.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And obviously Teresa and the Fudas are enemies at this point. And apparently, I guess that puts Jen Fessler and Rachel Fuda in a weird spot, judging by the trailer. That's not really a friendship that I feel invested in at all. I didn't even realize that they were like super close, but
Mm,
that kind of is teased in the reunion in the trailer that they have some issues because of that kind of new closeness, I think. Um, do you care about
yeah.
that? It's definitely a new thread, I guess, to follow.
I think it's a new thread. I think with this show, and again, I this is the testament I give to this show almost above others. Is that the friendships are really genuine? I feel like with Fessler and Fuda, they joined at the same time, and clearly Fuda and Daniel Cabral kind of went in with a lot of tension. So I feel like when you are like experiencing something together, you kind of like bond in that way. But I think what makes the show again really hard to cast, but so special is that I think authentic friendships on reality TV are really hard to come by these
For
days.
sure.
Like real, and it's you have people who join the show, like a Margaret, like a Jackie, like a Jennifer, who like they don't just film the show. Like the Jersey women are so ingrained in each other's lives. Like they talk like Margaret and Dolores. Like I remember we didn't know for years. They're like, no, we talk on the phone every day for like hours on end. Like where we spend holidays together, and then you have like Jackie and Margaret and Melissa were very close. Like that
Very
is why
close.
this is so weird. It's not just like alliances shifting that is exciting, but like okay, like this stuff feels real. Same with like Jennifer and Teresa are very close. Like, and I think that that is what really sets the show apart. And again, in a landscape, I think it's just the nature of reality TV and where we're going. Um, where it's you don't really have that as many authentic friendships, and that's okay. It doesn't always have to be that way, but I feel like that is the secret sauce to the show that they really invest in each other, and it starts to become, the stakes are real. They feel like familial as friends.
Yeah, no, totally. Like they just feels that they're part of these like the same suburban communities where where gossip travels fast and people sort of like they go to each other's houses and like sit there for hours and really bond and like that just feels like it's sort of part of their life. Um, and I think it also speaks to the power of like, I mean, I think, some people criticize the show for this, but I think it's a great part of the show where like the cast hasn't changed that much over the years. We'll add two people every couple of years that really work. But like we haven't had like a one season housewife on Jersey
Mm-mm.
in a very long time. I'm like trying to rack my brain. I guess we've had like a friend of here and there, like Tiki Barber's wife that was like, blink and you miss it. She wasn't even on the reunion that season. But like it's like they hold on to their people on the show. And I think that adds to that feeling that you're talking about of like these really entrenched connections that make the stakes higher, they make it more believable, they make the
Mm-hmm.
feelings richer and more real. So that's that again, that's why Jersey is different.
1000%. And I feel like it's not for lack of trying. Again, I feel like they did the Tracy Johnson thing. And there was that, remember that realtor, Michelle, who came on talking about Joe Gorga and the business and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
I feel
I
like they
forgot about
try.
her. Yeah.
But what I appreciate about, and I don't know if it's Sirens, the production company, or if it's like Bravo with that show, I feel like they pull the plug early. Like if it's not working, we're not going to
Right.
sit through I feel like some cities, and there's nothing wrong with this, some cities you watch and you're like, oh, they were kind of on the fence with her, and then they gave her a full-time status last minute, and then she's just not going to be back next season, and it's
Anna
not going to
Marie.
work.
Yeah, exactly.
Period. I was going to say Diamond, but I was going to let you take that.
I'll say it.
Right. So it's like, it's nice to see them. And again, as frustrating as it can be, it's nice. I feel like sometimes we have to know, like, they know what we're doing. As much as we have complaints, like they know what's going to work holistically. And I feel like that's why it took so long for us to get new people. And like Danielle and Rachel really work,
They
and
really
you still
work.
have someone like, and again, I think it's going to be, let's say we had just gotten rid of Jackie and not kept her around. And I feel like, when you're offered a friend of thing, we always hear that, like, it's really up to the housewife. It's kind of like a big hit to the ego. Um, but the fact that she did stay around, it seems like we're about to get a really wild fallout between Margaret and Jackie. So
So that's the last thread that I kind of want to follow for us today. We didn't really get much of that, if anything, in the premiere. It comes to Jackie and Margaret's big falling out. But it's kind of what it's the thing that I think was whispered about when they were in production on this season. Like people were like, "Oh my God, did you hear that Jackie and Margaret are no longer friends? Like, how did this happen?" Um, and it kind of seems like obviously it's sort of Jackie, but also like Margaret and Melissa too is sort of involved in that. But I think it's mostly between Margaret and Jackie. But I think by proxy, Melissa's also probably is not friends with Jackie anymore. Um, I guess what do you
I
remember?
know.
What do you remember from like your first reaction to hearing about this? How has your opinion on the situation evolved? And like, what do you think we're gonna see?
It is really shocking. I mean, you've spent a great amount of time with these women too. I
Yeah,
feel like they're just, again, there's an authenticity to them genuinely. And it
yeah,
was kind of shocking because, again, they're real friends. It doesn't feel just like, oh, it's an alliance, like an alliance ship. They don't really care about each other. So it definitely just felt like, what is happening? I mean, at BravoCon, even, this was like they had just wrapped. And then hearing that Jackie was going to be on Teresa's panel and Danielle Cabral, we had heard about Danielle and Jen in that fight.
right.
So Danielle being on the other panel made sense, but it's weird. And now I guess you kind of hinted at it. My bigger question, I guess, I'm excited to go into it and see how it all evolves. I want to know how like Melissa gets involved in it too. Like I want to see like how I guess it is just by proxy, but I guess it'll help us really gauge like what's really going on. Like if this is just a reality TV thing, or if there's something a bit more serious, depending on like how the like her and Melissa were really good friends too. So I want to know like how did that fall out too? If it's
Yeah,
just something between you and Margaret.
yeah. I think my read on it, and I would like to be surprised by this and be wrong, but my read on it is that it is a little bit of a move from Jackie to sort of mix it up on the show for herself, which
Mm-hmm.
again, this is her job. And so like I don't necessarily blame somebody for doing that. I understand the thinking behind it, but I think it becomes real hurt on the other side when you're Margaret and then I guess by proxy Melissa, who feel like a real friend of yours for several years is kind of throwing away the friendship just to try to, further their place on the show or potentially get back to full time again or things like that. And I'm not saying that's what Jackie did, but that's the read I think that they're having on it, or that if you kind of can piece it all together, that's sort of I think what if we're picking up what they're putting down. I think that's sort of the implication, and so I'm curious to see if it feels that way, because I think they are genuinely hurt by it, and I think that the thing that I've heard, or maybe was it hinted in like a trailer or something, is that I guess from Jackie's perspective something might come out or there might be a receipt or something that proves that Margaret was behind some sort of rumor from several seasons ago. I don't know where that comes from or what, but that's sort of, I think I've gotten hints of that. So it could be real hurt on her side too. It might not be fully based on reality TV movement, but that from the outside, that's sort of the perception that a lot of people have.
For sure. I mean, with all these shows, there's always that underlying tension of like, this is really about the show. And like, we're
Yeah.
fighting about one thing and it's about the show. And this is something that you can't take that equation out of it. So I feel like you said, from either one side or the other, there is a feeling of like, oh, like I was either used by you for the show, or maybe our friend. It feels like, and again, we have to watch it. It feels like the crux feels like, were we really friends at all from both
Yes,
sides?
totally.
And I feel like that is, you can point to a lot of, you can fight to, you can point to Bethany and Carol with that. You can point to a lot of different falling outs that have been really genuine that are really kind of hard to pinpoint. So I think we're in for a good ride. And I think that it's interesting too. I mean, we have like, this is what's so crazy about Housewives. And like one of my favorite things is like the footage you have that like winds up being like so foreshadowing and like Shakespearean. Like we have Jackie 2 seasons ago saying like, you do not want Margaret as an enemy. And now
Totally.
Jackie and
Oh my
Margaret
God. It's
are
Shakespearean.
enemies.
Yeah,
Yes. So like I'm interested to see, it is a little heartbreaking again because
of
like
course.
when you're fortunate enough to work around women like this and like when you get to see their genuine friendships, it is kind of sad. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of
Oh my God.
disappointing. But
Like I
yeah.
remember I went to Meredith Marks had I think season 2 or 3 viewing party for her for Salt Lake, and Jackie, Dolores, and Margaret and Lexi all showed up together, and it's like that was a totally off camera, that was off season for them, and they just showed up to have a fun night together. And like that's just one example of I think many times that you and I have like seen them out and about at different Bravo adjacent or New York events, and like
Hmm.
those are real friendships, and like obviously it's like there are pictures being taken and whatever, but like that was not for the show, and that's a different thing. And yeah, it's definitely sad. And like I loved their friendship. And my first ever time I interviewed Jackie was with Melissa and Margaret on her first season. And
Yeah.
it's like that. And that was a while ago. And they've had a great friendship since then. But I think also the timing of Jackie kind of going to the Teresa side of things is also tough and telling, because it's not this point of finality for Melissa and Teresa and Margaret and Teresa. So that probably kind of makes it hit a little deeper. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
gonna be we're in for a
Yeah.
ride. I'm like already
Yeah.
like I'm excited and stressed.
Excited and stressed. I think the premiere was fine, but I really do think this season looks great. And again, as Andy said, I think having Melissa and Teresa sort of coexist works for this one season. It's probably not going to work going forward. So I think that's also something to pay attention to is, are we being kind of set up or teased in terms of what the show could look like going forward, or like what, because that's going to be top of mind for me. I think the entire season as I watch, like, is it they both go? Is it one of them go? Because it's pretty clear that it's not going to be this for season 15. So
Right. And the thing is too, and we've talked about this at length, like it's really easy, like as the viewer watching to be like, oh, you either just pick Teresa or maybe some people feel you just pick Melissa, but I feel like they really are both big assets for the network.
huge,
Like
huge.
Teresa is, again, she is one of the best reality TV stars, period, to ever do it. She, at this point, it's like her and Kyle as like
Yeah,
OGs who have stood the test of time. And I say this all the time, no matter how you feel about Melissa and like the way online chatter goes, like you go to BravoCon, the Gorgas cannot get through anywhere. Like
yep.
they're just big talent. We followed them for over a decade now, and people really love them too. So I feel like it's a more difficult decision than even we realize. Like and I think that's exactly why we're at where we're at
Yeah,
with it.
yeah, and I think that you know that you have an asset or a big star on your hands when people feel so passionately about them. And I think people feel so passionately about Teresa and Melissa almost more so than pretty much anybody else on Bravo, because it's so divided, because we've spent so much time with them, like over a decade for Melissa, 14 seasons with Teresa. It's a long time, and it's a storied family history, and that is a lot to throw away if you're going to abandon one of them from the show. So yeah, I don't know what they do. I'm intrigued. I do not envy whoever has to make that decision. But we'll be keeping our eye on it this season. I feel like we've covered
Yeah,
everything, Jared. I feel like we've kind of we followed all the threads today.
we did. It was great. It's so
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
always.
Oh my God. Well, Jared, thanks for doing this. I appreciate you coming on. I feel like this is the perfect time. Where can people follow you, get more of your content, more from you? Because you do great work.
Yeah, thank you. You can follow me on Instagram at the Jared Alex, and on X at Hey It's Jared. Yeah, those are like the two places where I post most of my writings and musings and things. Um, and also, I just want to say Gibson too. I'm just like so genuinely proud of you and like proud to work with you, and also just proud of like your whole journey and everything that's happened. It's like you were saying earlier, like it is a very interesting little lane we're in terms of covering reality TV like this, and it can be really challenging and tough. And you've always just been really
Oh,
lovely,
that's
and
so
we've
nice
like
of you to
found a
say.
good rapport. Of course, and
Thank
you're
you.
killing it.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And I'm gonna do a plug for your TikTok too, because
Oh, period.
you've been starting this great little series where you basically parody some of the things the housewives do on the show at just like, before a girls' trip or before a big group dinner. And if you're listening, go find those because they're fucking hilarious and very
my
accurate.
my TikTok is at the Jared Alexander. So yes, definitely go there. I have quite some time on my hands these days, so I'm going to be posting a lot more, which is good.
Thank God for that. Well, Jared, thanks
Yes.
again for doing this, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
I want to gab.